Hi chess friends, this is Sir Glenn Garcia for Olongapo City Chess Club, and I will discuss today an opening called the Queen's Gambit Accepted. So the stem moves is d4, d5, c4, and instead of defending the pawn by c6 or by e6, we will capture the pawn. Okay, so in this position, white has three main moves. Knight f3, e3, and e4. Now, if white tries to recover the pawn too early by playing queen a4 check, followed by queen takes pawn, this will give black a very nice counter by playing knight c6. And after queen takes pawn, simply queen takes pawn. And this gives black the advantage. So, instead of recovering it back, let's discuss the main lines. Okay, so we first we first familiarize ourselves with the common trap involved in this variation, which starts from e3, b5, a4. Now black cannot play pawn a6 because of after pawn takes, white can capture black's rook. Therefore, black will have to defend it by c6. And if black does that, white opens the long white diagonal. This is the a8 h1 diagonal. And after queen to f3, black is forced to lose a piece. Black will either sacrifice the bishop to save the rook, queen takes bishop, followed by knight d7, and queen takes pawn will win, or knight c6, queen takes knight, check, bishop d7, and a simple queen f3 will give white an advantage of one piece. Therefore, I want to introduce to you a very simple line that we should follow in this line. So after e3, I want you to adapt a line which set up your pawn on a6, your pawn on e6, your knight on f6, followed by c5. A good example is in the line, let's say for instance, white plays bishop takes pawn. We control the e6 square, we control the d5 square by blocking the diagonal of the bishop. Knight to f3, knight to f6, and let's say after knight c3, we play c5, okay, followed by putting pressure on it by capturing and then playing knight c6. So castle, pawn takes. White can take either with the knight, with the queen, or with the pawn. Queen takes pawn is out of question because it gives black the opportunity to exchange queens early, which is usually gives both sides an equal in endgame due to their symmetrical pawn structure. Now, knight takes would be the same. It's only the only difference is both still have queens, and black will simply develop his pieces by controlling the d5 square, bishop to b7, followed knight bd7, rook c8, the bishop e7 or bishop c5, and then followed by castling. Simple illustration of this plan is this. Let's say here, rook d1, knight bd7, and then after, let's say, white plays a3 to prevent a possible push on b4, we simply castle, followed by rook c8. Queen c7, rook d8, rook c8 will give black uh, an equal position. Okay, let's go back. Normally, this is our plan if white plays the standard formation of e3. Now, I want to discuss e4, which is the move that we want to provoke or we want to invite white to do. Well, the main line that I will discuss to you in this next chapter would be knight to f3, which gives the white pawn on d4 support at the same time preparing for e3 push. Okay, so let's discuss the seemingly good looking move, which is e4, which releases the bishop's line to enable white to capture the pawn on c4, and it does not block the bishop on c1 compared to e3, but this will give black the opportunity to play the counter gambit, which is e5. Okay, now here, if you notice that since the d4 is attacked, bishop takes c4 is out of question, so white has need to do something about it. Capturing on e5 would give black the opportunity to exchange queen and therefore having an equal position. Let's say for instance knight to c6, bishop takes c4, knight takes e5 is equal. If white tries to defend it with f4, it gives black the opportunity perhaps to quickly develop pieces starting with bishop check. And let's say for instance knight to f3, castle queenside would be terrific for black due to the opportunity to destroy the pawn structure of white. So let's say for instance white plays um, king c2, bishop takes knight, pawn takes bishop, and now the very powerful knight d4 check, getting the pawn on f3, and black and white is still finding ways to complete his development, while black's pieces, especially the knight and the rook, is already very active. So let's try to go back. Instead on capturing on e5, white has to move his knight to f3. This will allow him to add support on the d4 pawn as well as putting pressure on the e5 pawn. So here, black has to reply knight to f6, and white has two ways to meet this move. Is either to make a pin on g5 or to simply develop the knight on c3 defending the e4 pawn. Let's first discuss the pin on g5. The pin on g5 will be met by again attacking the pawn on d5 by c6. And after bishop takes c4, we give white a check. And if white blocks it with a knight on c3, we capture it so we can create a weakness in the pawn structure. And after pawn takes d5, white can either capture on f6 or on d5. Let's discuss first. After white captures on f6, queen takes f6, bishop takes pawn, and castling gives black a very comfortable position because his pieces can easily go out of the board and can put a rook on the c file and put pressure on the c pawn. Possible continuation would be knight c6, or let's say knight to f3, knight to c6, castle, and bishop g4. And I believe black is not at all at a disadvantage here. I even believe that he might even be better here because of the pin on f3, threatening to again create a weakness or a double pawn on white's structure. So let us now discuss what happens if white plays pawn takes d5. It will transpose to the line that I'll be endorsing earlier, starting with knight bd7 and threatening queen to c7, skewering the bishop and the pawn on c3. White has to reply knight e2 so he can defend the pawn on c3, and after queen c7, bishop to b3, h6, black can enjoy a very comfortable position. He can simply castle and put the bishop on the very long diagonal. So let's say bishop g5 or bishop h4, castle king side, and then playing b6 and playing the bishop on b7 would give black a very comfortable position, since this will be connecting his rooks at the same time giving him the opportunity to place his rooks on the squares that he prefer. Okay, let us now try to go back. Okay, instead of bishop, let's discuss the line where white develops the knight on c3. Again, we play the move that attacks white's strongest pawn on the structure, which is the d5 pawn. We again try to white again try to capture back on c4, and after bishop to b4, bishop g5. Again, we immediately clear the tension on the center by capturing on d5. But first, we create a weakness on c3, and then capturing on d5, and now the line that I endorse, knight d7. Okay, there's a possible line here. Let's say, for instance, knight to f3, and then queen c7. And instead of capturing on f6, or perhaps um, putting the bishop away or moving it away, let's say, for instance, white creates a blunder here by playing queen e2. This will ultimately fail with a very strong move, b5, forcing white to capture on b5, and after queen takes pawn, black wins the rook on a1. Remember this trap, guys. I caught a lot of players, even strong players online, getting trapped on this line. So that's the initial line that I will discuss to you. Now let's try to check and see the line after um, bishop takes f6. Okay, so again, this happens after knight bd7. He plays bishop takes f6, and we recapture back. Now here, let's say white develops his knight on f3. We simply castle, castle. Okay, that is the main move. Because if he plays knight takes e5, which is a trap, white falls into a very long line force sequence of moves, which may give black the advantage. Let's say, for instance, rook to e8, creating a pin on the knight and the king. The knight cannot move because it will put white's king on check. White is forced to defend it with a pawn, and after knight g4, this sets up a very strong attack. So after, let's say, for instance, castle, even knight e3 is possible here, but even stronger would be queen b6 check first, creating an opportunity to win material. Let's say king h1 forces white to give up the rook. Okay, while the right move, which is queen d4, again, after queen b6 check, queen d4, gives black a very pleasant game because of the trick knight to e3. Note that white cannot capture the knight on e3 because of queen takes queen check. So here, white can either capture the queen on b6 or move the rook to f3. If rook f3 is played, it will give black the opportunity to gain the advantage after the following moves. Rook takes e5, okay, threatening to capture the bishop on c4. So after pawn takes, knight takes, this gives black a very favorable material imbalance or exchange of two minor pieces, which is the bishop and the knight, for white's rook and pawn. Okay, so usually in this type of games, black has the advantage. Now let's discuss the line if instead of rook f3, white plays queen takes queen. We play pawn takes queen, rook f2 to prevent the knight from capturing on f1. And then again the trick, rook takes knight, pawn takes rook, knight takes bishop, which I believe will give black a very slight advantage. Okay, so you can use your engine to prove my analysis otherwise and prove to yourself that this line gives black a slight preference or a slight advantage. Okay, so okay. Now instead of capturing on e5, the right move is castle, and then we have two ways to go from here. You can either play bishop g4 or e4, which I believe both will lead to black's advantage. Let us now consider e4, which is the most direct. After knight e5, queen c7, d6. We move the queen, attacking the knight again. Queen d4, takes, takes, and it's very possible for black to equalize easily in this position, perhaps by neutralizing the diagonal by playing bishop e6. And after black puts a rook on d8 or d file, it will put pressure. He may simply recover the pawn on d6 and pressure the d4 pawn. And this gives black a very pleasant equality. Okay, so knight d4 is out of questions because black can easily recover the pawn on d5, and other moves would be the same if white tries to block it with uh, block the d file by the knight. So let's say for instance white plays it safe. We're playing on e1. Black will simply put a bishop on b7 on the long white diagonal and put pressure on the pawn. And this should give black a very pleasant equality. Bishop b7, knight to e3, and a very good maneuver here perhaps is putting rooks on e8 and on c8. This will give black um, equality. Okay, let's discuss bishop to g4. Bishop to g4 is another line, and let's say on bishop to g4, white plays h3 or castle castle and then h3 again. Cat up bishop g4. White plays h3. We play a very good move counter, which is rook c8. If ever white captures the bishop on g4, we play rook takes bishop. So he drops back. We drop back as well. And after g4, bishop g6, knight takes e5, rook takes pawn, knight takes bishop, pawn takes knight, queen g2, defending the pawn on h3, queen d6. I believe um, it's an equal position, but I slightly prefer black because of the king's white's weakness on the king's position, or a weak enemy, weak king or exposed king. Okay, so that's it, folks. Please wait for my next installment of the video regarding Queen's Gambit Accepted. Goodbye.